There's some really exciting paleontology news coming out of southern China. The research team that worked out in the field extracting the fossils was led by Xingliang Zhang and Dongjing Fu, both of them paleontologists from the Northwest University of Xi'an. Their work took them into the heart of the humid riverlands of southern China, into the Qingxiang area in the southern expanse of the Hubei province, where the Danshu and Xingxiang rivers run together. It was on the shores of this juncture, near a bridge that was close to where the rivers converged, that these paleontologists found a rock formation called Stata, and all of the fossils that it contained. Now, if you've listened to my science news segments for a while now, you might have heard this word before. In the past, I've talked about other Stata finds, which are exceedingly rare, but they contain ancient fossils that are in an excellent state of preservation. Stata is formed when fine sediments rapidly capture and preserve the bodies of freshly dead organisms. Covered in this fine sediment, the body is sealed in an anoxic environment. This preserves the tissue so well that even soft tissues can be preserved to last for hundreds of millions of years, not just hard tissues like shells and beaks and tiny primordial bones. This particular Stata in southern China turned out to be 518 million years old. After they analyzed the fossils within this Stata and wrote their paper, what the researchers found was that 518 million years ago, a collection of early Cambrian organisms lived in an aquatic habitat. This menagerie of creatures was highly diverse, including jellyfish and comb jellies, sponges and anemones, and a wide diversity of worms and worm-like creatures, as well as the earliest ancestors of the arthropods, which we know and love today as the insects, the arachnids, the crustaceans, and all of their jointed-legged protostome relatives. Way back in the days of the primordial Earth, when all of the vertebrate animals were confined to the oceans, these warm water coral reefs were like natural laboratories for natural selection. It was where a lot of the biodiversity of life as we know it came to be. Anyway, back to this more specific Stata find in southern China, what the researchers found was that, unfortunately for them, but fortunately for us, some of the members of this biodiverse community were swept up in the underwater equivalent of a landslide. You had this mudslide, or a silt slide, sweeping down the floor of the aquatic landscape, and it captured these poor creatures and carried them down into deeper, colder water. Their death was all but assured, and their bodies, lost into the abyss, were fully encased in sediment. Now, these excavations at this site in south-central China, the excavations are far from complete, but this doesn't mean that the researchers have been unable to write an initial paper documenting their initial findings. This paper has been published recently in the journal Science, and it basically covers all of their initial findings and their initial expectations of this fossil discovery and what it means for paleontology and what it means for our understanding of natural history. Now, the numbers here are a little wild. So with the excavation work that's been done so far, they've extracted 4,351 separate individual fossils, or 4,351 individual creatures from that ancient primordial community. These thousands of individuals belong to 101 distinct species. 48 of these species are already known to science, but 53 of these species are newly discovered. Other researchers in the field, not directly involved in the research, were really excited to look over and comment on the findings. Alison Daly is a paleontologist at the University of Lausanne. She described two species in the cache of fossils that particularly stood out to her. One species is called the Chinorhynch, or the mud dragon. These Chinorhynchs, or their descendants, still exist today, but they're quite small. They only grow to be a few millimeters in length, and their natural habitat is soft mud. So, evolutionarily speaking, these are like the townies that haven't left home since the Cambrian explosion. But surprisingly, the Chinorhynch ancestors that were preserved in the Stata were up to 4 centimeters long, which is an order of magnitude larger than their modern descendants. So way back in the day, these Chinorhynchs were a lot bigger. That's pretty cool, and it's somewhat unexpected. The second species that Mrs. Daly was fascinated with were the comb jellies, which were numerous and heavily represented among the fossils. And this makes sense, since in this early time period, fresh out of the Ediacara, simple, soft-bodied creatures like comb jellies and the early jellyfish were well-established and abundant predators. Miss Daly said, quote, "It's not just the quality of the fossils that's amazing, it's the abundance. In all my career, I never thought I would see and witness the discovery of a site this good." If you were to make a dream wish list of what you would want to see in a new Cambrian fossil site, this would be it. This is just the first of what will undoubtedly be a series of high-profile papers revealing all sorts of answers to mysteries about the Cambrian animals. Unquote. Now, another researcher named Martin Smith is a paleontologist at Durham University, and he said, quote, "Its preservational quality is mind-blowing. If you sent a time traveler back to the Cambrian period armed with a camera and an X-ray machine, the images they would come back with would be nothing compared to these fossils, which preserve detail finer than a human hair." Unquote. Later, Mr. Smith said, quote, "These fossils help us to piece together the steps that evolution took as animals evolved from whatever squishy blob represents their common ancestor to the rich diversity of lineages alive today. Because some of the preserved organisms are much simpler than their living relatives, they help us to tease apart how complex organs, such as brains, could be assembled through blind, evolutionary processes." Unquote.